Hello there. Welcome back to the Podcast Daily. It is Tuesday of the start of camp week. That's what I'm calling it. It just rolls off the tongue, Bill.
Camp week?
Camp week.
I love camp week.
Yeah,
It's best
coming.
week of the year.
That's right. Starts Thursday for Ohio State. We're one day closer, and all of our nonsense off-season shenanigans will be over, and we'll be talking
Thank God.
It'll just be a different kind of nonsense shenanigans after that, but at least we'll be able to sprinkle in some new information. But until then, Bill Landis and me, Austin Ward, are coming back to the well. One of our favorite things. Guys to watch.
Dudes to watch. Dude watch.
Watch list season has arrived. We're not doing that. We're not just going to name every player in America and say, hey, these guys are up for consideration for the best of whatever
We should
position.
do that. We should go back and forth until one of us runs out of someone to name.
Yeah, 1 through 85 on the watch list. These guys are going to play for Ohio State this year. That's what watch list season is all about. So Thursday, we will be out there at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. There won't be pads on. There won't be really game planning for Indiana, but still, it will be fun and informative to see the Buckeyes get back to work. Who's going to be the first person, Bill, that you look at? Look for, not at. That sounds crazy.
I think probably Treveyon Henderson, which I don't know if that would have been my answer before we went to Big Ten Media Days. And Ryan Day rather emphatically and unprovoked said, like, we're really excited to have a healthy Treveyon Henderson back for this offense this year. And the reasons for that are obvious, but it's been a long time since we've seen him healthy and just like running around. We saw a little bit of it in the spring, not a ton. As you said, it's not going to be like full contact real football, so there'll still be something there, I guess, left to see later on in camp. But on that first day, I just want to see him, a full participant in all the drills, which we expect he will be, cutting like we know he can when he's fully healthy, showing a little bit of that burst in the situations that he can, because he's an explosive guy, and they're not short on explosive guys. They have plenty of them, but he's a real game changer, I think, when he's at his best. And there's going to be a long build-up, obviously, to that first game against Indiana, and he's got to get through all that. And I'm sure they'll try to manage that as best they can and not put too much on him right away. But really important player with a super high ceiling that it's just going to be good, I think, to see the real Treveyon again after not seeing him for so long.
Yeah, he was really eager to get back and wanted to be more of a participant in those drills in March and April. And Ohio State's like, just be patient, try and be patient. But he has so much, it seems like, and just from talking with him then, that he wants to prove and show that last year was a fluke or that it was primarily the injury. And I don't think it was. Primarily is probably the right way for it. It wasn't entirely the injury. There were times when he was healthy enough and not meeting the standard, and that's not unusual. We've talked about that with J.K. Dobbins and that growth process as well. But if you combine a healthy version with a really motivated and hungry version, maybe we haven't talked enough about that because we sort of just have lumped them all together. What do you do with the five? Mm-hmm. And I definitely did feel a year ago that the person who was best suited to make Ohio State go offensively in the running game was Mayan Williams. But the one who can elevate the ceiling to the highest level, to me, is Treveyon. And we'll have to see if he can. But that's why it's worth to go out there to see, all right, is he back? Is he going to – maybe the growth curve wasn't exactly where you wanted a year ago, but does it jump back up and you see some of that exponential explosion and really take over? Because he's the one who can, I think, change it in a way that others cannot.
Yeah, I think – maybe the way I would say it is, like, I think Mayan Williams has most often sort of maximized what he can do in a given year. And that's really good. Like, if he was the only running back on the roster, they're good to go. Because sure. I think Mayan is excellent. And Treveyon has definitely maximized at times, but I would say, like, less often, myriad reasons for that happening. But when it's, like, at its best, it's pretty good.
Pretty good.
So we'll see if he can get to that level again that he was at times as a true freshman. Like that's hard to kind of bottle up and bring week after week. Even like we see some of the best running backs, I think, struggle with that. And I guess he's in a good position where it is such a deep room and carries will be shared that he doesn't have to have the world on his shoulders. But he's talented enough to do it if they decide they want to. And I felt bad for him at times last year because you could see his frustration on the field. And then he talked about some stuff he's dealt with off the field with, like, people saying, like, what's wrong with you? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of hard to answer when you're hurt. So I think the best way to answer it is to get back on the field and remind them.
Yeah, another person that's in this same sort of boat, I think, is Joe Royer. And there's been a full off season now of hype for Jelani Thurman, and we've talked about him a ton. How big can the role be? How quickly can he acclimate, get up to speed at a developmental position? And we'll set all that aside. I mean, we've covered that enough. But the person who is closest to bringing that offense back to the way Ryan Day has always been most successful, in my opinion, with the 12 personnel is Joe Royer. And I know that there's a lot of confidence in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center that Joe Royer can be more complete, potentially better. It's not meant as a knock on Cade Stover, but can do all the things that a tight end is supposed to do, perhaps at a level that's even better than Cade Stover has, which is pretty good on its own. So if you can put those two together and recapture some of the Luke Farrell and Jeremy Ruckert type magic from a couple years ago, or go on down the list with the Hiremans and the others, I know that's how highly Joe Royer is thought of in there. And we're not going to see them line up in a lot of formations on Thursday. Maybe a week later, we get a better feel for what Ohio State wants to do. Probably still not, because they're going to be careful about revealing game plan stuff while the Big Ten bus is in there while we're in there. But I think that this is a team that would like very much to use 12 personnel a third of the time, roughly. And Joe Royer and Cade Stover would be the logical pairing in my mind.
Yeah, unless I don't know, unless Jelani Thurman
sure,
goes nuts and camp,
and that could happen.
Yeah, it certainly could happen. But I think you're right. I think it is Cade and it's Joe. And I think there are a lot of Ohio State fans too who are like, why play 12 personnel? That obviously you need it in some capacity, but why does it need to be a third of the time? I hear that, but I also like having that versatility within your offense, and we've seen it be very good for them over the course of Ryan Day's tenure here when they're able to do it, and they weren't really able to do it all that much last year. And I'm not they were really good. I don't think it was like a tremendous detriment, but I think they're better off if they can. And Joe, I would put Joe first on the list of guys who can truly unlock that, because even if Jelani is really good and better than people expect, I still think they're not going to want to put a ton on him as a true freshman at that position. Hopefully they use him, but I think to get back to what you're talking about in terms of usage, I think it has to be Joe Royer. So he would have been on my list too. That's a good pick. I don't know where I'd go next. Maybe
you're going to do it.
No, I
don't resist.
No,
lean in.
We've talked so much about it. Honestly, I don't feel like there's much more to say about offensive line at this point.
That's fair. I would like to see if Jacob James is at the head of the line.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah,
people ask, so why do we say that? It doesn't mean anything. It's day one. You're evaluating stretching lines or reps without the pads on. 99% of the time, though, the coaches aren't doing it by accident. It's not just the veteran guy go out there, you're first. There's a reason for it. The coaches have a depth chart in their mind, and it could change after 1 week. But if they go out there to work on Thursday and Jacob James is snapping to Kyle McCord, that would tell you the way they view it going into camp. And if Carson Hinsman is doing it, that's just as significant.
That is true, and not really something I had considered, although probably should have, because we have I think appropriately discussed Jacob James in this conversation. Even if you think Carson Hinsman has pulled away and he might have a job, and maybe Vic Cutler's in that, I don't know. Jacob James is coming back and changing the equation, whatever that means. So I think it's possible he's at the front of the line. I don't know that to be surprised by that. That is probably. I mean, there's a bunch going on the offensive line. That is.
We did talk about it on Monday.
One spot to look. We talked a lot about it on Monday. I think I would go to the defensive line next and spend a little bit of time watching Kenyatta Jackson, whom Ryan Day said is an NFL player, or looks like an NFL player. Excuse me, not as an NFL player, looks like an NFL player. Which I agree with, having seen him in the spring. That dude is a freak. He's gigantic, and much of this defense's success, I think, is going to be driven by whatever they can get out of JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer as your top two ends. But obviously, you need a third and a fourth, and even a fifth, maybe, if you can get there with a guy like maybe Amari Abor. But Kenyatta, just physically, even among that group of guys who are really good athletes, looks different, and looks like a kid that if the production and play matches what you would assume just based off physical profile alone, I think could be in store for a huge jump this year. And I'm not saying that's all going to be evident on day one of camp, but where he lines up, maybe how some of the reps are split, sort of how he carries himself, if that explosion does show up, if we get to see anything competitive with the offensive lineman, how much he's winning. There could be a lot to get into on that first day, and hopefully later on in camp we get to watch that too. But If you're like making a list of, I guess, second-year players or even just guys we've not seen a ton of who can make a big impact this year, who haven't to this point, I would put him fairly high, maybe number one if you take the quarterbacks out of that conversation.
Yeah, probably even if you went into Thursday without the intention of looking at Kenyatta Jackson, uh, the things that he can do would immediately catch your eye anyway.
Yeah.
So by default, you're going to look at him. And I think if Mitchell Melton is in that group, watching him again physically, if he's showing signs of that same burst in the strength that made Ohio State so convinced a year and a half ago now at this point that he could be the Jack and should be the Jack, and that he was the piece that Jim Knowles wanted to build around in that spot. How much is that back? How much is that evident as you get through day one? How much will that impact then who you're taking off the field if you want to use the Jack? We're not going to know that on day one. Probably not going to know that on day 10 either. But seeing him back and healthy, I know he's sort of in that same boat as Treveyon that had some conversations with them in March and April about, yeah, I'm close. I'm ready to get out there and show people again what I can do. It's really hard on these guys when they have to go a year. It's not like, in the NFL when, all right, you're injured, you're out for a year, but your contract is guaranteed and you're still getting paid through all that. And like these guys, their future is still laid out in front of him, and he has not had a chance to prove that, for as he's building his resume for the next level and while trying to compete and help Ohio State, which to this point he's not been able to do. That's tough on these guys. You feel for them when they go through it, and you could tell how badly Mitchell Melton wanted to get out there. And the flip side is that Ohio State wanted him to be out there to play that Jack. So what does it look like physically? We'll see. That's something I want to look at for sure.
I mean, the way they talk about him, and I guess they've seen it. Right? We just haven't seen it, so you have to trust them. But if it in any way matches the way that especially Jim Knowles has talked about Mitchell Melton, then you're talking about a heck of a player who can really help Ohio State this year. So I just want to get a feel for that. This was what you have been telling us for the last 2 years, and sort of lamenting not having available on your roster. Does it actually match up with what we see?
Mm-hmm.
I hope it does for him, because it'd be a great story if it does. I would. I guess I'll stay on the defensive line, not to harp on one position too much. But I do want to get eyeballs on Caden McDonald and Jason Moore, the two freshman defensive tackles who came after spring practice. I think mostly just to see if they look like guys who might be able to help this year. I know that's a lot to put on true freshmen, but they have the three main defensive tackles with Mike Hall, Tyleik Williams, and Ty Hamilton, and I think it's probably safe to assume that Hero Canoe at the moment is the fourth, or Taiwan Malone, I guess, could be the fourth. Maybe it's more likely Taiwan's the fourth. Mm-hmm. But I think you'd like to feel really good about 5 or 6 guys at that position. Not that you'd use them all, as Ryan Day has sort of put it out there. They want to cut down that rotation a little bit, perhaps. But if those true freshmen are able to give them periodic snaps throughout the season, more than just the traditional garbage time stuff that they might get otherwise, I think that would go a long way in keeping that defensive line fresh for the majority of the year. So it's not the end of the world, I don't think, if they're not ready. But watching Katie McDonald walk around in the spring when he's here on a visit, you're going to go, oh, that looks like a guy who might be ready by the time summer rolls around. And I think the same thing with Jason Moore too. So they've had some time now with McMurati to be here for a few months and work on that, and now they get to put it on the field. So I think they're two interesting guys.
As I try and figure out what is going to happen at safety, my year-long struggle, it was suggested to me that Jahad Carter doesn't have to be solely at nickel, and that Cameron Martinez could be out there first again on Thursday, and that Jair Brown may be getting a more serious look. I saw it at the end of camp, and I mentioned that him and Ryan Turner, it does appear, and I asked both Perry Eliano and Tim Walton about this in that last conversation we had with them in May. What's the benefit? Is there a risk to putting Jair Brown there? And if you're pretty settled at the top 3 at corner, and you like what you have in the new guys coming in, and you have Jair Brown adding 10 to 15 pounds, and you've debated whether you need to have more cover skills or be able to help against the run, it does seem like Ohio State has settled on the fact that it thinks Cameron Martinez can be the starter, and Jahad Carter has the ability to play any of the other 3 spots. I'm just going to be looking to see if he's not solely as a number 2 nickel on Thursday. And will we know? Will they do enough of that for me to tell? Maybe not. Probably not. But that would be pretty revealing about how they view this puzzle that I can't seem to put together in the right way. And I'm sure that Ohio State has a much better idea how those pieces fit but it does seem like it's not a nickel or bust situation for Jahad Carter, which I find interesting.
Yeah, and on one hand, I'm like, okay, that's good because he played all three spots in a not the same defense, but I think a similar enough defense at Syracuse that it translates rather seamlessly. He played all three spots over the course of 3 years there, which is great to have that kind of versatility in your room. I think the more guys, and I guess Jim Knowles doesn't agree with this, and he's the ultimate arbiter on it. But I've thought that the more guys that can play all three spots without subbing is a good thing for Ohio State. He said, no, we want to sub everybody. Like, okay, whatever. You're the guy who gets paid $2 million for it, I guess. But so like where Jahad Carter is interesting, but then say he's not at nickel. Now all of a sudden it's like, okay, nickel is Cam Martinez and Jair Brown, and now you have 4 guys for 2 spots.
Does seem to make it harder, which is why I'm having such a hard time, Bill.
Yeah, so I don't know, that muddies the waters a little more for me. When it comes to this conversation, I always sort of fall back on they have a lot of guys who I think are good football players. So I think there are a lot of different ways to get to the right answer. But yeah, don't know what that answer is. Don't have no idea, and I think it's probably something that's going to change throughout the course of camp. So I'm likewise interested in that position for all those same reasons. And I think maybe if I stick on that position, we don't talk a lot about Lathan Ransom because of all this intrigue about what's happening around him. I'm kind of curious to see what kind of like leadership maybe he takes on for the defense as a pretty veteran guy at this point, a guy who will be a second-year starter in that system, a kind of a 3-year starter, or going into being a 3-year starter now on the defense, and a guy who I think maybe at times last year came pretty close to like scratching the ceiling of the kind of college player he can be, but it wasn't consistent. And obviously at the end of the year, had a little bit of a letdown. But I think he's really good. I don't know. I think maybe the fan base sometimes is a little split on him, but I like him quite a bit as a player. So where he is, banded adjuster, I think is interesting, but just sort of like how he takes command of the back end of that defense too, starting from day one of camp, I think will be really important.
So the fact that I haven't mentioned the quarterbacks, that's clearly a lie. That's going to be the first one that I'm going to look at because I always do. I have a simple. I'm easily distracted by this shiny thing, and the quarterback is important. But there's a reason we left it out. I mentioned it on Monday. I'm going to reiterate it again. The quarterbacks are going to talk before camp starts. So on Wednesday, there will be a lot more conversation, both on the podcast daily and afterwards, about the situation. I don't know how different any of it will sound from what Ryan Day said a week ago in Indianapolis about managing the battle, how it's close, and both guys are going to get their shot early on. And if one emerges, he'll name a starter. I bet that the conversation is going to be pretty similar to that, but we'll at least have some different voices to add to it.
I think he's going to name a starter. I'm just kidding.
Oh,
he's not going to do that.
Drill down. It's going to be on Wednesday. We got it. All right. Bill Landis has made his prediction, and that feels like a good place to wrap things up on the podcast daily for Tuesday, 2 days away from the start of Ohio State camp. Looking forward to more coverage all week long. Hope you stay with us at the podcast. He's Bill. I'm Austin. We will talk to you later.